When SARS broke out, which is another coronavirus, when SARS broke out in 2003 in China, a lot of connections were made in the scientific literature to civets, which are a cat-like animal that was sold for consumption. And they were found with very similar virus in the wild. And so people really thought that connection was pretty solid. And so around then, there were bans put in place, at least temporarily, about eating civet. Civet has come back into the public consciousness as something that people eat and is sold in some marketplaces for eating once again. And there's been some speculation that civet might be a species that was involved in the current coronavirus outbreak as well. Again, because that species is known to be host to other coronaviruses. So people wonder, coronaviruses all interconnected, there's some similarities. Could civet be a species that's involved here? The concern in these markets in general about the connection, it's not that hard to make the logical leap from a scientific perspective. You say, okay, well, here you have, for example, with coronavirus, the current coronavirus, you say, well, there's virus that's 96% similar to what's happening in people in bats that have been found in southern China. Okay, so maybe the bats had coronavirus and maybe they interacted with some animals that were at wildlife farms in the nearby area. So these are farms that were raising wildlife to be sold and slaughtered at one of these marketplaces. So maybe the bats feces or urine, the animals somehow encountered it, and then the animals were kept in tight quarters with each other on the farm and on transport to the marketplace. And as these animals interacted and were packed tightly together, let's say they were biting each other, or their saliva was dripping, or their feces was being spread from one animal to another on their paws or on their noses, and then the virus is constantly replicating as any virus does, mutating in the process as any virus does, and then perhaps mutated to such an extent that when a person at the marketplace was slaughtering these animals, maybe they had a cut on their fingers, that they breathed in virus, one way or another, the virus had mutated enough that the person now was capable of being host, and then the virus took off. That, according to the World Health Organization, seems like the most likely theory of what happened. So
just to so we're going from bats, right? And now, are those do people eat bats in these? Are they sold in the marketplace? I know I saw some pictures early on, but of dubious origin of like bats being cooked, but they don't actually eat them. I'm told that in China, they do not eat bats, that bats are not commercially sold, bats are not sold in the marketplace, bats are not on the menu. I'm told that by Peter Lee, who is Humane Society International's China director. He himself grew up in China, and he said that though he did not live in an extremely rural community, that he is aware of and has traveled there for work, and that is not done. So, or at least not commonly. It's maybe in some kind of famine situation, people people would do what they needed to survive. But totally fair. Yeah, that's possible. And of course, no one knows what happens with every individual household. But on any commercial scale, that's not done. And so. But they do eat. But they do eat civets. So you're saying, okay, we're going from bats to civets. Or maybe another species. Again, there are several species that are biologically capable of hosting other coronaviruses. So pangolins, civets are a couple that have been mentioned. There are other wildlife animals that are consumed as well by people. Bamboo rats, for example, are sold at restaurants. Now, an important thing to make clear is that most people in China, if you open their fridge, it's like what's found in America, in the sense that there's chicken, there's pork. Those are very popular foods. You don't open your fridge and find bamboo rat. That's not a staple for individuals normally. Now at restaurants, they'll be sold as a delicacy. Just like in the United States, you might go to a restaurant and find cricket on the menu, and maybe you don't normally eat cricket. These restaurants in China might sell you bamboo rat. They might sell you soup that has civet and snake and a few other species in it. But that's not the general norm for people in China. So, I mean, I've seen, I have a couple of thoughts. One is that, I mean, I've had a fair amount of interaction with Chinese culture in particular through doing martial arts and going out to eat a lot. And I know that they really like fresh things, and, the fresher the better. And that may have something to do with, refrigeration. Historically, like there wasn't good refrigeration. So it's like, okay, I want to eat something. I want to know it was killed, recently so that I can make sure that it's fresh. That's my thinking on these markets. You typically see it like if you go to a Chinese restaurant in the US, they always have like fresh fish out front. It's like, those live fish tanks. And then I've been in a restaurant where they actually, I was looking at eels in the tank in the front, and then next thing I know, it's served to me in a little soup dish, it's definitely like part of that culture.
And in other cultures, like picking your own lobster at a restaurant.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's something about that fresh, seafood in particular, but
totally.
So what I'm kind of wondering is that if that's really part of the culture, it has anything changed that we're not going to have another situation like this where there's, assuming that that's where COVID-19 originated, if nothing sort of changes, I mean, are we going to see like another pandemic come down the pipe that from this region as well? I mean, is that something to worry about at this point, or has the Chinese government clamped down?
Well, in response to COVID-19, China's legislative body took action and said, okay, we are banning the consumption and sale of wildlife. So they listed what wildlife is, and this is terrestrial wildlife, so not seafood, but animals found on land like pangolins and civets and so forth. They said you cannot eat those anymore, and they shut down, according to state media, they shut down all the wildlife markets. All the wildlife farms as well. Now, the wildlife farms were these usually small rural farms that were promoted as a poverty reduction tool. They would help you fund it, so it was subsidized. And let's say you'd raise bamboo rats, and they would be sold off in the marketplace. And they employed millions of people. There were thousands of these farms, many thousands of the farms. And so they shut all of these down in 2020 as a direct result of coronavirus. So without the farms, it will be difficult to, continue to support that industry. That doesn't mean no one's growing it. That just means, or that they couldn't start growing them again. But right now, that's a significant step. Now, a lot of these farms, according to some experts I've spoken with, say that some of the farms were just covered. They weren't actually breeding the animals. They were trapping wild animals and selling them as bread. And again, if the animal's wild, maybe it would have been encountering more disease threats as well. But whether or not this will have long-term changes, I guess, is a little bit up in the air. Again, civets, went on pause after SARS in 2003, and then they came back. So it's hard to know what will happen long-term. I think certainly the scale of this pandemic is so large that it will stay in people's minds. And so you would think that would lead to larger actions. Yeah. But our engagement with wildlife continues in China and elsewhere, both in the pet industry, in the fur industry, for food. And in China, for example, though they took this huge step to ban the consumption of meat and the sale of wild meat and the sale of it, they did not shut down farms that are having other purposes. So China has a gigantic fur industry, both in terms of its demand and its supply. Mink in particular is gigantic there. It's one of the biggest, and perhaps now the biggest in the world, due to the shutdowns of so many other countries' mink industries. And we know that mink obviously is capable of carrying coronavirus and passing it back to people. Now, the information from China about coronavirus on its mink farms is non-existent. We don't know what's happening in China as far as mink farms, or even if they're testing on mink farms there. But we do know that their mink industry has continued. And also, if your farm is raising wildlife for other purposes, usually traditional Chinese medicine or ornamentation, you're still allowed to do that as well. So people are still engaging with wildlife very closely. And that is something that you could say will continue to be risky for people.